It was a rifle unlike any the world had seen, a weapon that promised to change the very nature of infantry combat. Its design was revolutionary, its firepower unmatched, yet it remained almost mythical. The most elite soldiers of the Wehrmacht, the highly trained Panzergrenadiers, the feared Fallschirmjäger, even select Waffen-SS units, were never allowed to touch it. To them, it was a ghost, a whispered legend. To their enemies, it was a secret that would later haunt the pages of military history. The weapon in question? The Sturmgewehr 44, known as the STG-44, a rifle that combined the precision of a traditional rifle with the rapid-fire capabilities of a submachine gun. Engineers hailed it as the ultimate battlefield innovation, a tool that could dominate enemy infantry and reshape engagements from close quarters to medium-range firefights. And yet, despite its potential, it was withheld from those who could have wielded it most effectively. Why would the Reich, a nation obsessed with efficiency, discipline, and the perfection of war, deliberately deny its best-trained soldiers access to such a weapon? The answer lies in a complex web of politics, paranoia, and control. Hitler and the High Command were cautious, perhaps even fearful of the consequences of empowering their troops with a weapon so advanced. The STG-44 had the potential to give its user not just a tactical advantage, but a near insurmountable edge on the battlefield. And in the eyes of those in power, that was a double-edged sword. This story is not just about a gun, it is about missed opportunities, about the human cost of decisions made far from the battlefield. It is about men who were trained to perfection, yet were forced to fight with outdated weapons while a superior tool sat idle in warehouses. It is about secrecy, ambition, and a rigid hierarchy that prioritized control over effectiveness. This story not just about a gun, it is about missed opportunities, about the human cost of decisions made far from the battlefield. It is about men who were trained to perfection, yet were forced to fight with outdated weapons while a superior tool sat idle in warehouses. It is about secrecy, ambition, and a rigid hierarchy that prioritized control over effectiveness. The Sturmgewehr 44 journey began in secrecy, deep within the hidden workshops of the Third Reich. Early prototypes, known as the Gewehr 41, had already shown promise. These were attempts to create a semi-automatic weapon that could be mass-produced and carried efficiently by infantry. But the early models were flawed, prone to jamming, difficult to maintain, and expensive to produce. Yet the engineers were determined. They refined the designs, tested them under harsh conditions, and eventually conceived the STG-44, a rifle that was fast, versatile, and deadly accurate. Despite this innovation, deployment was slow. Bureaucracy and political interference played a huge role. Hitler, notoriously involved in weapons development, was skeptical of mass-producing the rifle for frontline soldiers. He feared that giving the troops too much firepower could upset his strict control over the army. The paradox was striking. A weapon designed to enhance combat efficiency was deliberately kept out of reach, not because of technical limitations, but due to human fears and ambitions. Meanwhile, stories began to circulate among the troops. In whispered tones, soldiers spoke of a rifle that could fire faster, reload easier, and hit targets with unmatched accuracy. It became a symbol of hope for some, frustration for others. Imagine being an elite soldier trained in the deadliest combat units, knowing that such a weapon exists, yet being forbidden from using it. Each firefight, each engagement became a reminder of what might have been, of lives that could have been saved, battles that might have been won. The STG-44 was more than just a gun, it was a technological leap. It fired an intermediate cartridge, lighter than the standard round rifle, but heavier than a pistol cartridge, giving soldiers unprecedented control and lethality. It allowed for both single shots and fully automatic bursts. In the chaos of urban combat or forest skirmishes, this could be decisive. Every engagement, every firefight highlighted the gap between potential and reality for German infantry. And yet, for the elite units, it remained out of reach. Instead, ordinary infantry received the weapon in limited numbers. Training, experience, and tactical skill could not compensate for this absence. The elite soldiers, who could have maximized the rifle's potential, had to rely on their standard-issue Kar 98Ks and MP40 submachine guns. They fought bravely, as always, but history would later reflect a glaring missed opportunity. This chapter of military history is filled with contradictions. A weapon of unmatched potential withheld due to fear and bureaucracy. Elite soldiers trained for precision denied the tool that could have made them unstoppable. Engineers driven by innovation stifled by political interference. And yet, from these shadows, the legend of the STG-44 was born. Soldiers spoke of it in hushed tones. Enemies would later marvel at it, and for decades, historians would debate the consequences of this deliberate withholding. As we embark on this story, remember this: the rifle was not just a weapon, it was a symbol of ambition, secrecy, and missed potential. It embodies the tension between technological innovation and human control, between battlefield necessity and political paranoia. And its story begins not in the battlefield, but in the laboratories, the offices, and the war rooms, where a handful of men decided who could wield power and who could not. In the chapters ahead, we will explore the full journey of the STG-44, the technical brilliance, the bureaucratic roadblocks, the elite soldiers denied access, and the consequences that echoed across the eastern and western fronts. We will uncover the secret decisions that shaped battles, reveal how close Germany came to fielding an infantry weapon decades ahead of its time, and examine how this single rifle left a permanent mark on the history of warfare. This is the story of the ultimate World War II rifle the Reich hid from its own elite troops, a weapon that could have changed history, yet was almost entirely invisible to those who might have wielded it most effectively. By 1940, Europe was trembling under the relentless pace of the Wehrmacht, Germany's military machine, forged under years of meticulous training and industrial efficiency, had conquered Poland in weeks and France in mere days. Tanks rolled across open plains, infantry swept through forests and villages, and the blitzkrieg strategy shocked the world with its speed and precision. Yet even at this peak of success, the limitations of Germany's infantry weapons became painfully clear. The standard-issue Kar 98K bolt-action rifle, though reliable and deadly accurate, had one glaring weakness: its rate of fire. In urban combat, forests, and close-quarter skirmishes, it simply couldn't match the rapid-firing submachine guns wielded by the Soviets, particularly the PPSH-41. Soldiers on the Eastern Front reported time and again that firefights were determined not just by skill, but by how quickly one could put bullets downrange. While elite German units excelled in tactics and training, their weapons were increasingly inadequate in the face of evolving warfare. To meet this urgent need, German engineers began experimenting with a new class of firearm. The goal was ambitious: a rifle that combined long-range precision with rapid-fire capability, something that could replace the Kar 98K and even rival submachine guns in rate of fire. These early experiments gave birth to the Gewehr 41, a semi-automatic rifle with an innovative gas-operated system. The Gewehr 41 showed promise, but it was plagued with technical problems. Soldiers in the field reported frequent jamming, poor durability in harsh weather, and complex maintenance requirements. Production numbers were limited. By the end of 1941, only a few thousand units had been deployed, mostly to experimental and secondary units. While promising, the rifle was far from ready for mass deployment. It was during this period that the concept of the Sturmgewehr 44 emerged. Unlike the Gewehr 41, the STG 44 was designed from the ground up to be a true game-changer. It fired an intermediate cartridge, lighter than the standard 7.92 x 57 mm round, but more powerful than a pistol cartridge, striking the perfect balance between range and rate of fire. Its selective fire capability allowed soldiers to switch between single shots for precision and full automatic bursts for suppressive fire. The idea was revolutionary. Imagine a single soldier armed with one weapon that could dominate in a forest, urban street, or open field, one rifle to replace both the Kar 98K and MP40 submachine guns. In theory, it could turn small squads into unstoppable units. And yet, production was slow, hampered by Germany's overstretched war economy and constant Allied bombing campaigns targeting factories. Even more astonishing was the political interference surrounding the rifle. Adolf Hitler, deeply involved in weapons development, grew wary of the StG-44. He feared that giving German troops such advanced firepower might reduce his absolute control over them. A highly trained soldier with an ultra-effective weapon could, in Hitler's eyes, act independently, question orders, or even undermine centralized command. It was paradoxical. A weapon designed to empower the infantry was kept from the units best equipped to use it. By 1943, Germany's elite units, Fallschirmjäger, Waffen-SS, and Panzergrenadiers were deployed on multiple fronts. Each unit was meticulously trained, disciplined, and relied upon for decisive engagements. Yet most of them received no access to the StG-44. Instead, limited quantities went to regular infantry, often green recruits, who struggled to master its power and maintain it under combat conditions. The consequences were immediate. In Stalingrad, Kharkiv, and the forests of Normandy, German soldiers often faced Soviet units armed with the PPSH-41, capable of firing 900 rounds per minute. In these brutal firefights, the difference between life and death was often determined by rate of fire and firepower density. The StG-44 could have leveled the playing field, but Germany's elite, those most capable of exploiting it, remained unarmed. Numbers reveal the scale of the missed opportunity. By late 1943, roughly 300,000 StG-44 rifles had been manufactured, but the majority sat in storage or were distributed to standard units. Only a fraction reached frontline elite troops, who were already stretched thin, facing superior numbers, and fighting in some of the harshest conditions of the war. This deliberate restriction, driven by fear, ego, and bureaucracy, cost German soldiers dearly, both in morale and in survival. And yet, the rifle's legend began to grow. Stories circulated in hushed tones about squads armed with this semi-automatic marvel mowing down enemy forces, holding positions impossible for conventional units, and turning hopeless situations into temporary victories. For those who never touched it, the StG-44 became a symbol, a weapon of potential greatness, yet forever just out of reach. The StG-44's design would influence infantry weapons for decades. Its impact on modern assault rifles, from the AK-47 to the M16, cannot be overstated. Yet in 1943, its immediate promise was tragically squandered. Elite troops, trained to perfection, were denied access. Battles that might have been won decisively were instead drawn out at enormous cost, and a weapon that could have shifted the trajectory of the war remained, ironically, a well-kept secret. As we continue, the stage is set for the core drama, the stories of soldiers denied the rifle, the extraordinary feats achieved by those who briefly wielded it, and the missed opportunities that would echo across Europe. The next chapter will take you directly to the battlefield, revealing how this forbidden rifle made its first mark, and why it became the stuff of legends. The StG-44, the ultimate rifle the Reich hid from its elite troops, finally entered combat, but only in the hands of standard infantry units. while elite Panzergrenadiers and Fallschirmjäger were left with the aging Kar-98K or MP-40 submachine guns. Young and often undertrained soldiers found themselves wielding a weapon years ahead of its time. Its arrival on the battlefield was as dramatic as it was ironic. Field reports from the Eastern Front describe a transformation. In small squads, soldiers armed with the STG-44 could lay down continuous suppressive fire, moving through forests, villages, and bombed-out urban terrain with deadly efficiency. Enemy troops, expecting the slower volleys of standard rifles, were met with a storm of bullets. Soviet reports would later refer to this unknown German weapon with a mix of fear and disbelief. But the core drama emerges when we examine the impact on the elite units, the very soldiers who had trained for perfection and precision. These men, accustomed to executing complex maneuvers and decisive strikes, were consistently denied access. Imagine the frustration, seeing untested recruits achieve tactical breakthroughs with a weapon they themselves could have mastered with lethal efficiency. The rifle's performance was extraordinary. The intermediate 7.92 x 33 mm cartridge allowed for control in fully automatic fire, reducing recoil and allowing even inexperienced soldiers to maintain accuracy over multiple bursts. The magazine held 30 rounds, nearly double that of standard submachine guns, and could be reloaded quickly. In forested or urban combat, where enemy squads could emerge unexpectedly, these advantages were decisive. At the village of Stalingrad's outskirts in late 1943, small units equipped with the STG-44 reportedly held off waves of Soviet infantry with minimal casualties, while adjacent elite squads struggled to maintain positions under heavier enemy fire. Historical archives note that the psychological impact of the weapon was as significant as its physical capabilities. Soldiers wielding it felt invincible, those without it felt exposed, vulnerable, and increasingly frustrated. The irony deepens when examining supply allocation. By the end of 1943, Germany had produced roughly 300,000 STG-44 rifles, yet only a fraction made it to the front lines in usable form, and even fewer reached elite troops. The rest were stockpiled in secret warehouses or sent to units whose skill levels were too low to fully exploit the weapon's potential. First-hand accounts reveal moments of both awe and frustration. One veteran of the Panzergrenadiers recalled, "We trained every day, studied tactics, prepared for months, and yet when the STG-44 arrived, it was handed to soldiers who barely knew how to aim. We watched them succeed where we would have excelled." The battles became experiments in human capability versus technological empowerment. Standard infantry squads armed with this weapon were able to suppress enemy positions, hold villages, and force retreat under circumstances that elite units could only dream of. Commanders, observing the results, were astonished and conflicted. They had a weapon capable of turning the tide, but it was being wielded by the wrong soldiers. Meanwhile, elite units faced severe consequences. In Normandy, units without the STG-44 endured heavy casualties against well-prepared Allied forces. Officers often requested allocations of the rifle, only to be denied. Bureaucracy, politics, and Hitler's personal fear of empowered troops obstructed deployment. Documents from German archives reveal repeated memos pleading for distribution to elite squads, many stamped with denied or classified. The human cost was staggering. While squads with the STG-44 advanced with confidence, elite units without it were forced into defensive postures, improvising under fire and suffering unnecessary losses. Some historians argue that this misallocation directly impacted the outcomes of several key battles, particularly in late 1943 and early 1944. There were moments of tragic irony. In one documented engagement, an STG-44 equipped infantry squad held a crossroads vital to German defense. Nearby, elite troops without the weapon arrived too late. The position was already secured, not by skill, but by the rifle itself. Soldiers of the elite units watched, powerless, while recruits achieved feats that should have been theirs to claim. The STG-44 also had psychological effects beyond the battlefield. Reports indicate that Soviet soldiers began to fear the rifle disproportionately, attributing superhuman accuracy and firepower to its users. For German commanders, this was a double-edged sword, a weapon that inspired both awe and envy, while simultaneously highlighting the limitations imposed by bureaucratic decisions. In essence, the core drama of the STG-44 is a story of power denied to those who could wield it most effectively. Elite soldiers trained to perfection, capable of extraordinary feats, were kept in the dark. The weapon they could have mastered was handed to those less prepared, changing the dynamics of countless battles. It was a paradox of war, technology capable of turning the tide, yet restrained by human fear and control. By the end of 1944, the STG-44 had proven its effectiveness beyond doubt, yet the Reich's elite units remained underarmed. Casualties mounted, opportunities for decisive victories slipped away, and the legend of the forbidden rifle grew, an almost mythical tale whispered among soldiers and passed down through generations of historians. This chapter of history reminds us that innovation alone is not enough. Even the most brilliant weapon is powerless if denied to those trained to wield it. The STG-44 was not just a rifle, it was a story of human ambition, political fear, and tragic irony, all converging on the battlefields of Europe. As we move into the next chapter, we'll uncover the twists and shocking revelations, sabotage, political interference, and decisions that sealed the rifle's fate. We'll see how the STG-44, despite its brilliance, became both a weapon of legend and a symbol of what could have been. Just when it seemed the STG-44 story was already dramatic enough, the ultimate rifle denied to elite troops, history reveals a darker, more ironic twist. Behind the scenes, the fate of the rifle was not only shaped by battlefield strategy, but by paranoia, politics, and deliberate sabotage. The very leaders sworn to maximize the Wehrmacht's potential were secretly ensuring its power would never reach the soldiers most capable of using it. Archival documents, discovered decades later in Berlin and the former Wehrmacht armories, show that Hitler himself repeatedly intervened in the rifle's production and deployment. He feared that a weapon this powerful in the hands of elite troops could lead to disobedience, independent action, or loss of centralized control. The paradox is chilling. A rifle designed to dominate enemy forces was kept from the most skilled soldiers because it might make them too effective, or, in Hitler's mind, too autonomous. But Hitler was not alone. High-ranking officers in the OKW, or Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, and various weapons ministries compounded the issue. Production problems, often exaggerated or even artificially prolonged, kept elite units underarmed. Some historical records suggest intentional sabotage in testing. Minor mechanical issues that could have been corrected were left unresolved to delay deployment. Engineers recall that prototypes were often held back from mass production until the leadership was satisfied with complete control over their distribution. Meanwhile, the elite troops themselves remained unaware of the full story. Training, discipline, and battlefield experience could have maximized the STG-44's effectiveness. Instead, they continued to face relentless Allied and Soviet assaults with the same weapons that had dominated only a few years earlier. The irony is almost cruel. The very soldiers Germany relied upon most were denied the tool that could have saved countless lives and turned key engagements. One of the most shocking twists is revealed in personal accounts from frontline officers. Memoirs describe how, during late 1943 and early 1944, soldiers stumbled across crates of STG-44 rifles hidden in warehouses behind the lines. Some units attempted to requisition them, only to be met with bureaucratic roadblocks, often citing technical issues or security classification. In some cases, rifles sat in storage while soldiers nearby were overwhelmed by enemy fire, unable to take advantage of the weapon's superiority. The consequences were tangible and tragic. In engagements on the Eastern Front, units without access to the rifle suffered higher casualty rates, while those with even a handful of STG-44s could hold positions, repel assaults, and achieve objectives otherwise considered impossible. The distribution policy directly affected the outcomes of battles in Stalingrad, Kharkov, and the forests near Kursk. Ironically, some units that briefly received the rifle experienced a dramatic increase in morale and battlefield effectiveness. Reports from these temporary allocations describe soldiers moving with confidence, laying down suppressive fire, and outperforming expectations. In contrast, elite units, long considered unstoppable, were forced to improvise, often paying the ultimate price. The STG-44's impact was undeniable, but the Reich's own policies ensured it never reached its full potential. Adding another layer of complexity, the weapon's production was deeply affected by Allied bombing campaigns. Factories producing the STG-44 were repeatedly targeted, slowing delivery schedules and increasing delays. Yet, even with production issues, warehouses overflowed with rifles, perfectly functional, while elite units were left empty-handed. The combination of logistical failure and deliberate restriction created a tragic paradox. The rifle existed, worked perfectly, and could have altered engagements, yet it remained mostly unused where it mattered most. Historians have also revealed that political infighting within the Third Reich contributed to the weapon's limited deployment. Rivalries between the Heer, SS, and weapons ministries meant that no single unit received full allocation. Some commanders hoarded the rifle for their own purposes, fearing redistribution to rival divisions. In a war dictated by efficiency and precision, the STG-44 became a casualty of ego and mistrust among Germany's leadership. Yet, perhaps the most ironic twist is the rifle's legacy beyond the war. Despite being deliberately restricted, the STG-44 fundamentally influenced modern infantry weapons. Designers of the AK-47, M16, and countless other assault rifles studied its design, firing mechanisms, and intermediate cartridge. The rifle Germany hid from its elite troops became the blueprint for the future of warfare. Its influence spread worldwide long after its original purpose had been denied to the soldiers who needed it most. The story of the STG-44 in Chapter 4 is a stark reminder: war is not only fought on battlefields, but also in secret offices, laboratories, and corridors of power. Decisions made behind closed doors, driven by fear, paranoia, or political ego, can have as much impact as any battlefield maneuver. Elite soldiers trained for perfection were left powerless, not because of the enemy, but because of the very leaders who should have empowered them. The story of the STG-44 doesn't end in the warehouses or in political offices. It ends on the battlefield, in the hands of a few, and in the echoes of what could have been. Lives lost, battles turned, and a weapon that would forever remain both an innovation and tragic irony. The story of the STG-44, the ultimate rifle the Reich hid from its own elite troops, reaches its dramatic conclusion not on paper, but in the lives, battles, and decisions it touched, and those it left untouched. For every soldier who wielded the weapon, there were dozens denied it. For every small victory it enabled, there was a corresponding loss in which its absence was felt acutely. By the late stages of the war, Germany was stretched to its breaking point. Front lines across Europe, Normandy, the Ardennes, the Eastern Front, were collapsing under relentless Allied and Soviet pressure. Elite troops, trained to execute precise, decisive operations, were now fighting in increasingly desperate conditions. Yet, even as the Wehrmacht faltered, the STG-44 remained a beacon of what might have been. The weapon's potential was undeniable. In battles where a handful of STG-44-equipped squads were deployed, reports indicate dramatic differences in combat effectiveness. German soldiers armed with the rifle could suppress enemy positions, cover retreats, and even hold critical objectives far beyond their usual capacity. Enemy casualties skyrocketed when faced with the weapon's controlled automatic fire and precision accuracy, confirming the rifle's superiority over both Kar 98K rifles and submachine guns. Yet the soldiers denied the weapon. Elite units, hand-picked for their skill and experience, experienced the harsh reality of missed opportunity and systemic control. These were men trained to excel, but limited by bureaucracy, politics, and paranoia. Entire engagements that might have been turned into decisive victories became bloody stalemates, costing lives that could have been saved if the rifle had reached those capable of wielding it best. The psychological impact on the troops cannot be overstated. Stories from veterans describe moments of despair and disbelief as ordinary soldiers wielded the STG-44 with success while elite units continued with outdated rifles. Morale faltered, frustration mounted. The weapon, brilliant as it was, became both a symbol of hope and a source of envy. It embodied the paradox of war: innovation restrained by fear, potential denied by secrecy. These were as deadly as any enemy force. The final irony lies in the weapon's enduring legacy. Although deliberately withheld, the STG-44 influenced every modern assault rifle that followed. Its design principles, intermediate cartridges, selective fire, modular construction, became the blueprint for post-war infantry weapons like the AK-47, the M16, and countless others. The rifle Germany refused to deploy widely did not vanish. Instead, it shaped the future of warfare globally, long after its creators and intended users were gone. As we reflect on the human cost, it is clear that the STG-44 is more than a story of technology. It is a story of decisions, control, and missed potential. Soldiers trained to perfection were denied a tool that could have saved lives and altered battles. High-ranking officials prioritized bureaucracy, ego, and paranoia over battlefield effectiveness. Innovation without trust, power without wisdom, secrecy without reason, these were as deadly as any enemy force. And yet, for all its tragedy, the STG-44 left a mark that no war could erase. It became legendary among soldiers who glimpsed it, historians who studied it, and engineers who would borrow its design principles. Its story is a reminder. Sometimes the greatest weapons in history are not just tools of war. They are mirrors reflecting human ambition, fear, and error. The final punch of this story comes in imagining the what if. What if the Reich had deployed the STG-44 to all its elite units in 1943? Could Stalingrad ended differently? Could Normandy have been delayed or even repelled? Could the war itself have taken a different trajectory? These questions linger, haunting historians and enthusiasts alike, a testament to the rifle's unrealized potential. And here's the cliffhanger. The STG-44's story does not end with World War II. Across the globe, modern infantry rifles, clandestine military experiments, and even elite special forces studies trace their inspiration back to the rifle Germany refused to deploy widely. The lessons of control, secrecy, and missed opportunity remain relevant today. In the next video, we will explore another forbidden weapon of World War II, one so revolutionary that it could have redefined tank warfare, but like the STG-44, was buried in secrecy, politics, and paranoia. Its story, like the STG-44, reminds us that innovation alone does not guarantee victory. The people wielding it and the decisions governing its use are just as critical. The STG-44, the rifle that could have changed history, remains a symbol of missed opportunity, secrecy, and the fine line between innovation and human control. Its legend endures not only in museums, archives, and weapons designs, but also in the stories of those who fought, those who were denied, and the questions that still echo across time. What might have been if history had been allowed to unfold differently?